All right. Gaza War Day 374. Lebanon War Day 28. Just me tonight, guys. I talked to Greg, I talked to John, I talked to Laith, and now you guys just need an update of what's going on the fronts. Uh, Classic sit rep, an old style sit rep, the kind we've been doing for months. If I can just get my cords out of the way. All right. So we have a lot of things happening. Since last time I did a sit rep, I mean, it's too much. But as far as the past couple of days, the main thing I want to talk to you is what's going on the front lines of the battle in Lebanon. But there's other things to tell you first. You know about the massacres. There was a massacre just now in Tel Al Hawa in North Gaza. You probably know about the massacres in the middle camps, Nusayrat, and of course, Deir al Balah at al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital. Possibly the worst massacre so far. So Israel, just when you think Israel can't outdo itself, burning child hospital patients in tents outside of a hospital, burning them alive while connected to an IV. And cheering for it. Israeli social media is full of people saying we need more such massacres. So that's um that's where it's at as far as uh it goes. Massacres, right? Starvation strategy, explicit starvation strategy, written about in the Western papers as just a strategy that Netanyahu's doing. In AP, I think, Associated Press, I think they said, oh, he's considering a strategy to starve northern Gaza. Netanyahu is considering a strategy to starve northern Gaza. And this is it's all very interesting to see where our civilization has reached. And there's no hyperbole. There's no way to have hyperbole about where we are now in the world. There's nothing I can warn. There's nothing people like us can warn about. There's nothing we can try to say that we're on the edge of catastrophe or something. Whatever you might think we're on the edge of, we are over the edge of that. Whatever cliff you see or you thought you might have seen us heading towards, we are over the cliff. We are in free fall. Somebody said, I think it was Ori Goldberg. He's kind of a depressive Israeli on Twitter. And he said something like, this is a make or break moment for international law. No, it's not a make or break moment for international law. International law is broke in every sense of the word. It is broke. International law is over. When a force arises, there's a story from like 1919 in England. Apparently, there was a strike of the coal, rail, and steel workers, and they went to the prime minister, and the prime minister said, "If you're not prepared to take over," it was Lloyd George, or I don't know, got one of the English prime ministers. English people probably know who the prime minister was in 1919 during the general strike of the Triple Alliance, and the prime minister said, "If you're not ready to take over, you have to stand down." and and he had some spiel that was quoted by one of the union leaders, and he said something like, when a force arises within a state that is more powerful than the state, it either has to take over or get out of the way. And Israel has arisen as a force in the international arena that is that can ignore international law and not be punished. And so if there is a state that can ignore international law and remain part of all international institutions and decision-making bodies, then international law does not exist. And so whatever there is some kind of theatrical thing that they expect us to be stupid enough to believe. And yeah, good luck with that. So the other one that besides the starvation, yeah, so along with the starvation strategy thing, there was a headline that said something like no food has entered Gaza. I think it might have been Kamala Harris that said it in a tweet, and she said, food hasn't entered in 10 days. And some commenter on Twitter said, "Oh my God, why would food do such a thing?" And that's the reductio ad absurdum of the passive voice being used. Airstrikes kill people, explosions kill people, missile finds people in a cafe. That was from a couple of wars ago. And that's how that's where that kind of reporting ends up. That kind of reporting ends up with food of its own volition, not and choosing not to enter Gaza, causing starvation. But there is absolutely fighting in Gaza. There is a nightmare of fighting in Gaza. Gaza in Jabalia specifically, where the starvation operation and extermination operation is at its most intense. The resistance is also at its most intense. There are videos coming out of Jabalia all the time of extremely complex ambushes. One in also in elsewhere in North Gaza, not just Jabalia. I saw one from Beit Lahia just now. I'm sure John will break this down on Wednesday in the Electronic Intifada live stream. There was a massacre at one of the schools, the Hafsa school, and there was also a field report of fighting at the school. So the resistance has understood that there is no point in not fighting for all of these sites. So the resistance is fighting the Israelis at all of the sites where the Israelis are trying to massacre people. And that's what people have I've seen comments like this, like the international law is gone. It's irrelevant. It's a joke. It's a satire, or maybe more of a taunt. It might the best way to think of international law at this point is like some kind of taunt, like you're throwing it in people's face that there's this supposed thing called international law, which actually just lets genocide and massacre openly happen with no consequences, except possibly the United Nations periodically apologizing to the people committing genocide for shooting them, killing their personnel, injuring their personnel, assassinating them, which is happening in Lebanon all the time now. So the resistance is the only armed group that is trying to fight against this genocidal army. And for that crime, they will never be forgiven by the West for fighting against this genocidal campaign. They will never be forgiven, and neither will anyone who supports them or wishes them well. There's also still fighting in Rafah. There was a field report of attacks on armored vehicles in using the Yasin 105, the shoulder-launched rocket, shoulder-launched anti-tank weapon, and explosive devices, the Shoath, at Al-Janina. In the West Bank, okay, moving from Gaza to the West Bank, there's active fighting in Tubas and Jenin, the northern West Bank. There's also, it hasn't opened yet, but they've claimed now twice, 2 days in a row, the Israeli sources have claimed that they've committed an incursion into Syria. So the Israelis are claiming that they've attacked and taken new territories inside Syria. Their ground forces have gone from the Syrian Golan to Quneitra in Syria. Syria says that they haven't. So what's going on here? Maybe the Israelis are doing a trial balloon, seeing how people react, seeing how people respond, seeing what Syria does militarily, seeing what Russia says, seeing what Iran says, if they, in preparation for going into Syria. Sorry, it's late here. You guys know I record these super late, and here I am yawning. I apologize. How can I expect you guys to stay awake if I can't stay awake? And people commented on the contrast between my soporific delivery and Greg's high energy style yesterday. What can you do? Um, so the Syria thing might be a trial balloon. Might be. I expect they will try to attack Syria before the end. Why wouldn't they? They've been bombing, as you know, Damascus. They've been bombing the roads between Syria and Lebanon continuously. There's no reason to think they wouldn't also try a ground incursion. What? Why? Why not? The Syrian army, as you probably know, is in pretty bad shape after 10 plus years of trying to fight basically the Americans via the proxy of the so-called Islamic State, Al Qaeda, HTS. I don't know, the FSA, all of the different Al Qaeda, Islamic State, American proxies that have, and Israeli proxies ultimately, that have attacked Syria and killed hundreds of thousands of Syrian soldiers and degraded Syria and taken, the US occupies a whole chunk of Syria. The oil rich and granaries of Syria are occupied by the Americans, and Al Qaeda controls part of it. Turkey controls part of Syria. So Syria is in a really rough situation right now. They're not in the position they were, say, in the 70s, 80s, when they basically intervened in Lebanon and shut the Israeli invasion down. Israel would have invaded all of Lebanon, but Syria intervened. So they were facing each other, fighting each other at various times. Syria is not in a position to do that now. So Israel will probably make something out of this, try to start a conflict with Syria too, before the end. Maybe sooner, maybe later. Right now, Lebanon is Israel's issue, and Iran will soon expand to be a bigger issue for Israel. But let's go to Lebanon, and let me show you a map, because as you know, I've been talking to Laith, I've been talking to John, I've been talking to Greg Stoker about this on this channel. And I've been trying to get a picture and give you guys a picture of why Israel is having these difficulties moving deeper into Lebanon from the front line. And you've heard these names, Aitarun, Marun al-Ras, Yarun. In recent days, you heard Nakura. They were trying to go via Nakura. There's a place in between Nakura and Marun al-Ras, which is Ramye. That's somewhere around here. And Aita Shab was today. And earlier on, there's also Marjayun, Adaisa. And all of these places have been where the Israelis have tried to enter. And they've tried to enter, they've gotten into some populated areas after leveling them through airstrikes. And then they've faced ground troops, the ground troops of Hezbollah, waiting for them in various ambushes with machine guns, point blank combat, hand to hand, basically hand to hand. I mean, not hand to hand unarmed combat, but zero distance, as they call it, fighting with their rifles. And this has been happening down here at Ait al-Shab today, Marun al-Ras, more or less continuously over in Nakura, where the United Nations troops are and have been used as human shields, and up here in Marjayun. And all of these areas are also across if you look at the field reports of the rocket attacks, these are across from the areas, these are across the border from the staging areas that are being continuously hit. So Shtula is always being hit. Ramya here, this is Ramya Ait al-Shab. This is an area where the Israelis have been trying to go in for the past couple of days. And it's right across from Shtula, and Shtula is always under bombardment from rocket attack from Lebanon, from Hezbollah. Over here you have Marun al-Ras, Yarun, and they are basically across from Kiryat Shimona. Let me see if I can find Kiryat Shimona. Kiryat Shimona's down here. Ramon, Naphtali. These are the staging areas for Nahal. No, not Nahal. Avivim. Yeah, this is a town. This is one of the towns that has a barracks that comes under fire a lot. And then up here, you would have heard of, here's Kiryat Shimona, sorry. Kiryat Shimona is up here by the Marjayun. This is where they're staging the attack on Marjayun on this axis. And Kiryat Shimona, Metula is up here. These are areas that are also under continuous rocket attack by Hezbollah. So while they're staging, while they're getting their troops organized to go in to an incursion to infiltrate across the border, which, as John said, they do with their rucksacks. Or maybe it was Greg that used rucksacks and John that just called them backpacks. But they, strap on their backpacks and they walk across, and then they get into combat with Hezbollah there. So to give you a sense of how difficult it is to stage, it's basically all of the staging areas, all of the border towns, or now they have entered Nakura, the Israelis. The Israelis have entered Ait al-Shab. I believe they've entered Marun al-Ras. So when they enter is when they're fighting. So they walk across, and Hezbollah is waiting for them, and they fight. And while before they start walking across, while they're getting ready inside the borders of 1948 Israel, they are under attack. And points south of them are under attack. So Safed, Carmiel, these are areas that have been hit by Hezbollah rockets, missiles, drones, Akka over the past few days. And of course, Haifa being the big attack. You guys have heard of the attack on the Golani Brigade's base at Haifa. And today there were also missiles attacks on Tel Aviv. So that's the situation on the front line of the Lebanon war. And I still want to say that when the Israelis manage, because I do think they can, I will continue to say this, I think they will be able to go deeper into Lebanon. I think that they will be occupying Lebanon for a long time. And I think that the war will go on for a long time. These are all things that I think. This is all my opinion. I also believe that if they take enough troops up there, and most people think I'm wrong, but I think if they take enough troops up there, they can overcome the difficulties of being continuously mortared and make their way in a big way into Lebanon along these several axes of approach that I've been showing you for the past few days. And I think that should that happen, that will not be a sign that Hezbollah has lost or is losing. It will be a sign that the guerrilla war has begun a new phase. But as I've said before, we do not appear to be there yet. I want to show you also a little bit more of a bigger picture because in terms of something that's happening to, I don't know if I'd call it relief, but it's a situation whereby, for example, here's Iraq, here's Syria, here's Lebanon. Sorry, here's Iran, here's Iraq, here's Syria, here's Lebanon. There's an overland route of trade, including but not limited to weapons, and now aid that is coming from this direction: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. And this is Israel would love to do everything possible to prevent this from materializing and to cut Lebanon off the way they've cut Gaza off from all possible avenues of aid. Lebanon will be much more difficult to cut off. Things will continuously be able to be getting through, no matter how much Israel bombs. But there's also a certain amount of defiance that the Axis has shown. So I mentioned this when I talked to Greg yesterday, that the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, who happens to also be a pilot, flew a plane into Lebanon in basically in defiance of Israel saying Iranian planes are not allowed to go to Lebanon. Who does Israel think they are? I mean, I don't have to answer that question, but Israel doesn't get to say who gets to fly in and out of Lebanon. So Iran defied that ban and said they will be doing an air corridor. Obviously, Iran is still in this position where they're waiting for Israel and the US to bomb them, which they're going to do. And they they've said that when Israel and the US bomb them, they will counter Israel. They will counterattack much harder than they have in April and October. So part of this defiant air corridor talk and this flight by this Speaker of the Iranian Parliament is also to dare Israel to attack one of these planes, at which point Iran would have the pretext that it wants to do this attack. So that's the situation. And in all of this context, or in this context, is the Iraqi resistance, the Kataib Hezbollah, has sent a land convoy of trucks to Lebanon of humanitarian and other aid. And again, defying the Israelis to stop it, presumably. So this is probably a good transitional moment to mention or to talk about how the Iran-Israel war is also going to intensify. Um, the anti-air missile systems that the US is putting in place may not, I don't assess them to make a big difference. It's not going to those systems can be saturated. Israel has always had access to the best of what the Americans have. The Americans tried to repel the Iranian attack with everything they had in April, with everything they could move into place in October. And when Iran attacks again after Israel bombs Iran, they're going to have everything they have again. So this is not some new thing that's going to change everything. This is just the Americans kind of pledging that they will be defending Israel with everything that they've got, which everybody knows they're going to do. So after talking to Laith and John and Greg, how do I think this is going to play out? I think any one of these days, the Israelis and the Americans are going to bomb Iran, and then Iran will probably hit them back. and hit a bunch of targets. They may not end Israel's existence with this attack, but they will very likely destroy things that have a lot of importance to Israel's economy and have a different effect in terms of Israeli morale to continue the fight. Now, it remains to be seen how damaging the strike on Iran will be and what kind of preparations they're doing with the Russians and what kind of anti-missile technology they're bringing to bear and anti-air or air defense that they're going to have. Presumably they are also preparing not just their counterattack, but also their defenses. And so this is going to be something that Russia, China, especially are watching very carefully and probably more than watching, but they probably I would say they have a certain I don't know how to calculate it exactly, but I think it's fair to say that they have a degree of investment in Iran successfully defending itself against an attack by the US and Israel. Because if those technologies are successful or if they're terrible failures, Russia and China will want to know because NATO is coming for Russia and the Americans are coming for China. And they both know it. And they might as well find out sooner rather than later what works in terms of defending against the type of attack that the US and in the Middle East, Israel are going to do. So that will happen, and the Lebanon war will continue to unfold. As I said, I believe the Israelis will go deeper into Lebanon. The guerrilla phase will go long. Greg talked about sniper operations in the mountains. There will be the anti-armor operations of Hezbollah are really well armed. They have really effective weapons against Israeli tanks. They have really effective infantry against Israeli infantry. They have very effective artillery mortars against Israelis as they're getting together and concentrating their forces and gathering themselves. So all of this is happening to the disadvantage of Israel as they attack, but Israel's going to attack nonetheless, and Israel's going to go in nonetheless, and they're going to take their casualties, and they're going to take their lumps, and they're going to keep going. And they're going to probably go into Syria too, and they're going to attack Iran too, and all of this is going to happen over the coming weeks and months and maybe years, and I will continue to report it here on the sit rep. Now, before I go for tonight, I want to talk about a couple of notes because in the so-called alternative media sphere, especially on YouTube, I know a lot of people watch this channel and watch um, there's a debate ongoing about whether the tail is wagging the dog or the dog is wagging the tail. And like I'd say the left anti-war people, like myself, are of the persuasion that it's the dog wagging the tail, I guess, if we want to stick to that metaphor. But I do want to kind of, I don't know, it's not a compromise or splitting the difference, but I have introduced this idea that I believe that it's a joint ruling class. It's a factionalized ruling class, like, the British Empire had such a fractionalized ruling class. The Roman Empire had factions in the Senate and the optimates and the populares and I don't know. This is what they tell us. It was like this is what the classic historians of the 19th century told us Rome was like. I don't know what Rome. Who knows what Rome was really like? But the story goes that there were these different factions of the ruling class of the empire that had different ideas about how to pursue the world domination. And the Anglo-American ruling class is Zionist. They are all Zionists. And so you won't see any disputes about Zionism itself in this ruling class. You'll see disputes about lots of other stuff, but you won't see disputes about Zionism. And if you understand that Netanyahu and all of these other people that are in his coalition, the fanatical settlers, the murderous genocidals, they're all integrated with the American ruling class. They're not a separate group of people. They just have a certain opinion about the speed and pace and where things should go when and priorities. And they fight for their priorities. So I don't know if that enables us to split the difference. But if you think about it in terms of a joint ruling class, you don't really need to know, you don't really need to waste time about whether the tail is wagging the dog or the dog is wagging the tail. Because the differences between the two are purely tactical. Tactical in the sense of, should we do a genocide now or should we slow the genocide down? And it's perhaps not even that, but the reason Netanyahu can seemingly order the US around is because the chain of command in the imperial ruling class isn't, that the president is the US president is at the top and the Israeli prime minister is below him. The chain of command is much more in flux. Who's the billionaire, who's the deep, the idea of a deep state, right? Intelligence agencies and corporations and wealthy individuals and managers of key agencies, upper brass of the military, of different NATO militaries, bankers. Did I mention bankers? Drug dealers, criminals. Criminals play a role, billionaire criminals, money launderers. There's all kinds, it takes all kinds, right? And specific industries, right? The needs of oil industry, arms industry, tech, and Silicon Valley, Hollywood. Everybody has a role. Police, right? Policing institutions are part of the ruling class. You need to understand them as part of the ruling class that have specific interests and tactics and ideas that they bring to the conversation, and they organize in their own interests. They don't just take orders. Police don't just take orders. You can't get elected as mayor of a city and then just tell the police what to do. That's not how it works. They are a faction of the powerful, of the ruling elite, just like, somewhere in there, elected politicians also exist, and chairmen of boards, and even some NGOs, non-governmental organizations, can wield uh, a big influence over policy in certain moments, especially over the policy relative to a certain country, like Haiti or Venezuela, Cuba. So if you understand the idea of a conjoint ruling class, you can also explain the difference between why Israel does seem special, right? The Israeli elite are part of the general imperial elite. In a way, I would say that the Taiwanese elite or the Ukrainian elite are not. And that is why it's so that is why we have this idea that the idea that Israel is just a mere proxy, the way Ukraine and Taiwan are for the imperialists, is also not quite right. Ukraine and Taiwan are proxies in a genuine sense. The elites of those countries are um, much more like tools of the US that will be discarded as needed. The elite of Israel is not a tool of the US that will be discarded. The elite of Israel is seamlessly integrated with the elite of the US. There's no distinction. They don't have special rights or special mm, disbenefits. I don't know. They don't have a special lower status. They're right in there. They're right in there. And that's I think that if you have that concept, I think it can help dispel some of the confusion if you land right in the Zionist lobby is the problem camp, or the and the which doesn't explain the problem with the Zionist lobby idea is that it doesn't explain, or it assumes the impossible situation that the US would otherwise be benign in the Middle East, which it obviously has no history of being. And also it's impossible because post World War II history is Israeli history too. The Zionist colony has existed since 1948, but was coming into being for decades before that. So, on the other hand, if you land in the solely in the Israel as a proxy for the U.S. camp, you will miss out on why Israel seems to have this special status that no other proxy has. And I think the integration of the elites can help you understand that. There was a interview I saw on Mondo Weiss with a Hamas representative, and he said something like, "I know the American people well, but I didn't think the elite. I evidently didn't fully understand like how unconditionally the elite would support this genocide." And the uniformity of support across Western countries is elite support. The populations of even Western countries is very divided on the question of genocide. Um, I don't even know. I still don't know whether Western countries are majority anti-genocide. There was a time at the beginning I thought they were, and now I don't know. Maybe they are, but there's been a lot of insulation of the elite and of political systems to make sure the majority does not get to express its anti-genocide wishes, and much less see those wishes converted into reality. So that's oh, one other thing I wanted to say about solidarity. So I wanted to there's been a couple of big writers making big speeches about Palestine. And, for me, it's fine. You know, it's fine. I'm glad I'm always glad when left wing writers that have huge prestige and status say things about Palestine. But I just want to say that that's not my thing. And every one of these writers also says something that's just simply uninformed, ignorant, and sometimes a lie about October 7th and atrocity crimes that took place on October 7th, or about the nature of the resistance. I'm keeping this a little subtweety. I think most of you know who and what I'm talking about. But I think what I look for, and I'm just can only speak for myself here, but what I look for is something that we go back to Basil al-Araj, the young West Bank writer who prepared 8 rules of warfare to try to prepare people who were writing during the 2014 Israeli invasion. And I've cited this over and over again, and I can't cite it enough. But he talks basically about how the logic of guerrilla warfare. This is the point I've been trying to make to you on this channel, that when Israel goes into a place and you see the arrows on the map and you see that they've advanced, that does not mean that they've won. Guerrilla warfare is like this. Guerrilla warfare does not involve fighting for every inch of ground. Although, again, in Lebanon, we do seem to see that happening right now. The guerrilla phase hasn't exactly even started yet. Don't spread the occupation's propaganda. The enemy may broadcast images of prisoners. Don't believe them. The enemy will carry out assassinations, but the system will survive and the structure will survive. And losses, material and human losses, will be much greater than the enemy's. We are more capable of bearing the costs. Do not be alarmed by the magnitude of the numbers. The today's wars are no longer just wars or clashes between armies, but struggles between societies. And then, now that I've repeated all these rules, the 8th rule, he says, every Palestinian in the broad sense, meaning anyone who sees Palestine as part of their struggle, regardless of their secondary identities. Every Palestinian is on the front lines of the battle for Palestine, so be careful not to fail in your duty. And so these writers, they might be great writers, they might be fantastic souls, they might be tremendous intellects, they might be incredible craftspeople of the written word. But what I look for is for people to be what Basil al-Araj called Palestinian in the broad sense. And that's going to be my test. And is that your test? That's what I think has to be the test right now if you're writing about Palestine. So, like I said, it's fine. Good on them. Good on the great writers to do their great stuff. And we'll be here, as I tweeted, just okay writers. We'll be doing our thing around here as well. So, for all of you who are just okay, uh, hang in there. Hang in there. It's rough and it's gonna get rougher. So hang in there, and I will see you in the next one.